Good evening, everyone. I am Damnish Kumar, part of the organizing committee of SCL Hack IITK 2021. What a day to have this webinar. We had an massive outage yesterday for all the social media channels, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. I'm sure everyone got impacted. So it's a good day to have the webinar, which is on the cybersecurity and the zero trust security model. So the few housekeeping items, if you have questions, please use Q&A and write your question. We will not take any audio questions, so it would be on the chat. You can post your question and panelists will take it based on their convenience. So please keep writing your questions. Now let me invite Rajiv Sarup. Rajiv Sarup is the part of the organizing committee too, and he's gonna take it over from here. Welcome, Rajiv.
Thank you, Damnish, and good evening to everyone. I'm pleased to welcome all of you to the kickoff event of HCL Hack IITK 2021, the second hackathon on cybersecurity. The hackathon is designed by IIT Kanpur C3i Hub and brought to you by Delhi chapter of IIT Kanpur Alumni Association and TechRiti, the student body of IIT Kanpur. I would like to start with thanking all the sponsors, HCL, Color Tokens, Microsoft, Siemens, SciSec, Larsen Tubro, National COE, Tenant Sprint, Tenable, and NTPC, without which this event would not be possible. It's a free event largely for the students and is to encourage people to get into cybersecurity. And with the current transition of flexible work conditions post-pandemic, the cyber criminals have really having a field time. And all the news items which you see here, the cyber crimes are just going up. And I was reading some news item today which said that India is ranking second to United States in terms of cloud security threats. So I'm sure the panelists are very much aware of it and they will do some justice to this particular fact. So in a way, cybersecurity is everyone's business, those who know about cybersecurity and also those who are not aware. And it is with this idea that we conceptualized the cybersecurity hackathon last year. And the target was to popularize cybersecurity and sensitize people about cybersecurity to students, professionals, startups, and everybody who matters. So the 2020 hackathon ran about similar time last year. It was actually July, August last year. And that attracted 12,500 participants from 2,100 colleges in 12 countries. The first prize and the third prize was taken by IIT Delhi teams. The second prize went to teams of Dhaka University. And the juries, the starter prize went to graduates from Manipal Institute of Technology. So fairly wide coverage across the world and across India. In the current edition of the hackathon, we have two exclusive tracks, one for the programming people, programming experts, and the second for startups. And both run concurrently and there are separate prizes totaling worth about 30 lakhs. And there's also an opportunity for incubating a good startup in the IIT Kanpur incubation, which is called SIIC, and obviously subject to their meeting their conditions. And that gives additional money once they get incubated. The topic for today's webinar is Zero Trust Security Model, a very apt topic in today's world of clouds and work from home environment. So we have a very distinguished panel from HCL, Color Tokens, Microsoft, Siemens, and L&T. All are leading organizations in cybersecurity, and therefore they will do a very good discussion today. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's session on Zero Trust Security Model, Mr. Raja Ukil. Raja is SVP of Sales and Strategic Partnerships for APAC and Middle East regions of Color Tokens. Prior to joining Color Tokens, Raja was global head for Wipro's cybersecurity and risk services. A transformational business leader who led Wipro developed cybersecurity solutions that made customers increasingly cyber resilient. Raja has independently managed large businesses, $450 million and up, in his capacity as business unit head. As CIO for over 5 years, he led many business transformation initiatives. Raja has been winner of CIO 100 Hall of Fame in India 4 times in a row and many more times thereafter, and winner of the Global CIO 100 in 2016. Raja is a mechanical engineer from Jadavpur University, again saying that cybersecurity is everybody's business, so what your background doesn't matter, cybersecurity is important. And he now lives in Bangalore. Over to you, Raja.
Thank you, Rajiv, and good evening, everybody. I feel very humbled with that introduction, right? So, a little bit about, color tokens, because the rest are all names which you are familiar with. We are a startup, but a startup which is not a small startup, which we have 400 people based in California. And, we have major presence in India as well. So we deal with zero trust security as a platform, as a cloud-based platform, right? So I didn't want to take a lot of time talking about the company, and I'm privileged here to be amongst all of you and my co-panelists, and would like to thank Rajiv and the organizers for this opportunity. But before I get started and set a context, I would like to introduce my fellow panelists. To begin with, we have SREEKUMAR S. He is Associate Vice President with HCL. He is a practice leader of cybersecurity in the areas of infrastructure and cloud security, right? SREEKUMAR has over 3 decades of experience, which is 30 years, right, into infrastructure, cybersecurity services, and more recently into cloud as the world is transforming, right? He has many accolades, okay, and he's a very seasoned and veteran leader in the space of cybersecurity, and I'm sure that we will be very blessed with his insights into what is the need of the hour today. Next, I have AHMED. KHALEEL heads Cloud Engineering and Industrial Security at L&T Smart World and Communications. KHALEEL, again, he's a very seasoned cybersecurity expert. He has more than 20 years in this space, in technology risk assessment, cybersecurity architectures, and more modern security things on the cloud, which has to deal with microservices, containers, security, etc. Right? He is now heading the Cloud Engineering and Industrial Security practice at L&T Smart World. He was previously with Cognizant, and he was a cybersecurity director there. Next, ABHISHEK Kumar, and my co-panelists, if you could raise your hands, even though their names are in Zoom, I'm not sure about the display, right? So ABHISHEK is with Microsoft. Who doesn't know Microsoft? Over the last 5-7 years, I think Microsoft has emerged to become a dominant player in cybersecurity. So we know Microsoft to be the Windows company. Then they transitioned into cloud with Microsoft Azure, and now they are almost a complete end-to-end cybersecurity player. And I have personal experience in visiting their headquarters many times, and I've seen the phenomenal amount of work Microsoft is doing in this area, not only for selling their own products, but they also do a lot of work with various governments in order to track and help in cyber criminals and cyber investigations, etc. Right? So ABHISHEK's specialization, as you would have guessed it, is in digital security. He is the digital security leader, okay, and he has a lot of certifications to back up his experience, right, in the cybersecurity space. He's a well-rounded leader who has done consulting, delivery, and bringing up new solutions which will help customers. And last but not the least, I have Joshua Rebello, who is right now in the beautiful Union Territory of Goa, and he is with Siemens India. He is a cybersecurity specialist or an expert. He is an architect. So, if you have, questions around architectures, he is the best person. He has more than 15 years experience in the space of cybersecurity, and he has worked with companies like McAfee and Intel, right? So he is the person who is thick in the woods, and on a daily basis he is doing he's developing products and services for Siemens's customers worldwide. So thank you everybody, my co-panelists, for joining me here today on this, and I'm sure we will have a rich conversation. I will now go ahead and set the context, saying why zero trust, what is zero trust, etc., and it might be very useful. And my apologies upfront. We sometimes get tempted to get very technical, right? And we have grown older, I think I find it most difficult to teach my own daughter, right? So if you have any doubts around any terminology we use, please feel free to ask the questions. And even if we cannot answer all the questions today because of time, we will make sure that you get all our answers even after the event, right? So just as a context, the world maybe around 6, 7, 8 years back was very different when it came to how businesses were conducted, etc., right? So we had supply chains which were global in place, right? But we never had this concept of digital transformation to and a digital way of doing business, right? So as a result of which, what was happening was IT was any IT organization or any organization which you go had a lot of these applications which were hosted on servers, and they would reside in something called data centers, right? And around the data center, what you had to do was essentially not allow anybody from outside to come in, right? And this perimeter, it's literally called a perimeter or a virtual perimeter, was like a boundary wall around the data center. And there was a gate, and there were rules to and who could enter the gate under what circumstances, and this gate was called a firewall, right, in simplistic terms. So what happened was, this model actually, if you go back in history, and I don't want to sound melodramatic, was breached in 1260 AD, right? You remember the Battle of Troy, right? Remember the Trojan horse, right? Think of Troy as a perimeter, the perimeter around Troy, right? And that's why they were probably called, and Trojans came from there, right? So it was as early as 1260, it was rendered useless, right? Now what has happened is, roll back a few hundred years, or and you are in the modern era. So what has happened is, every business, for its survival, is getting away from brick and mortar business and going into digital, right? And digital way of doing business. And it's a hugely interconnected world, right? Today, the supply chain is very global. You look at India, look at the payments transformation, right? And the digital experience which it comes along with it. So as a result of which, what has happened is, increasingly, chief information officers have found it difficult to deliver this kind of capability within the data center. So they have started adopting cloud in a major way, right? We've talked about Microsoft, but there are others, like AWS and Google Cloud Platform. That has become, people have started developing applications or moving applications there, right? So that, you get capability which is not possible otherwise within the perimeter or within the data center. The second thing what has happened is, before the pandemic, I think every organization to the tune of 15-20% would be roaming users, right? They never used to be called work from home users, right? It was almost a taboo to work from home, except for one day a week. It was very fashionable to work one day a week in a month, or 2 days a week in a month. So what has happened, this pandemic has taken that world upside down. Businesses have been under a lot of stress. The economy has not recovered. And more importantly, everybody has gone at home. And I can tell you, I speak to a lot of CIOs and chief information security officers. So they don't know how to handle this. They didn't know when this pandemic happened. So, they didn't have so many laptops, so people were accessing from personal devices, etc. So with all this, what has happened is, one is the cloud adoption, the other is people working from home, and the devices being anything, right? Means it could be an iPad, it could be an iPhone or an Android phone. So if you look at, remember that gate around the perimeter, now there is no one gate, right? In fact, it is a series, thousands of gates, which anybody with malicious intent can get in, right? So as a result of this, the cyber risk has gone up for an organization many fold. Now, I am not a huge fan of data points, but it might make sense to give you a brief overview of what has happened, right, in the last 1.5 years, and you have essentially seen that, right? I noted it down somewhere. Just give me a second. So what has happened is, if you look at just the first half of 2021, which is January to June, there has been a 93% increase in ransomware, okay, compared to last year, right? Compared to last full year. So what is a ransomware? We all know those red screens. So, somebody comes into your environment and actually encrypts, okay, a server or a database, and then forces you to pay money. Now it has become more complex to say that they have genuinely taken your data. They also take the data out. So it's almost like called a data breach as well. There is another interesting point, and if you get a chance to read it, my request is all of you should read it. IBM actually reports every year, a state of cybersecurity report. There are state of cybersecurity report from everybody from my previous organization, but this one particularly researches well in the area of what does it cost an organization if there is a breach, right? So in 2019, right, there was the average cost of a breach for an organization around the world was 3.92 million, whereas in 2021 it's already 4.24 million. So imagine if a company gets breached, they just have to spend that much money on an average. Now, if you look at healthcare companies, for example, in the US, that number is around 9 million, right? Now, this is not the only impact of a cybersecurity incident, right? Your reputation goes for a toss. Your customers wouldn't want to do business with you, right? So it's a brand reputation question as well, apart from the financial loss. So one loses revenue, incurs cost in trying to mitigate, put in a lot of new processes and technologies. So now, what are we doing as an industry about it, right? And that's the key question. Here comes zero trust. Now, if I look at, a few years back, zero trust was a concept which was coined by Forrester, which is a research analyst firm, right, in 2010. And what was a zero trust principle, right? There is nothing called zero trust. You can't trust nobody, right? So it says that it relies on the principle of least privilege, which means that I will be given rights or access to do whatever I require to do my work and nothing else, right? So fundamentally, that is what it means. And it also means that, you constantly authenticate everything which is connecting to your assets, right? Applications talking to applications, user talking to applications, devices interacting with your applications or servers and whatever, right? So at a very basic level, that is what is zero trust. Zero trust over the last 10, 11 years has also evolved, right? Because nobody implemented zero trust and talked about it for this so many years, simply because, the world was not so, bugged with all this ransomware and cyber breaches, right? So if you look at it, several organizations have contributed to making zero trust where it is today, and it's still evolving. So, Google, Beyond Corp, if you know what Beyond Corp as a concept is, as an architecture, was later promoted by Google. Microsoft did a lot of work in this space through conditional access, and now they are talking about passwordless authentication, right? So everybody is contributing, and now the definition has also spread. If you look at Gartner, which is another leading research analyst firm, so they have now talked about, SASE which is secure access edge. And then, they talk about cloud workload protection. But at the fundamental, I think, without going into jargons about definitions, and these I'm sure you can get a hand on and read. I think important thing is the world has come to realize that the traditional way of doing security is no longer enough to protect an environment, right? And that is why there is an absolute need to look at something different. And zero trust has been widely accepted as the only possible alternative to save the world from, such menaces. And if you look at, I was reading a survey report, which was done by the US government, for larger enterprises. And it is interesting that 82% of the organizations are actually putting a zero trust strategy in place, or have put something, and, or are doing a project, or have done some part of the project, right? So I know it was a very long context setting, but I thought it was useful. And, with that, I will go over to my panelists. Okay, and in no particular order, and we will go round robin, right? We will have one question each for all five, and then we'll come back and do the second question. So the first question is to SREEKUMAR. Sri, you are closely associated with the digital transformation and movement to the cloud and cloud adoption, right? So, and you are also in cybersecurity. So, when you speak to customers globally, what are the challenges you see that customers are facing, with respect to transformation, right?
Thank you, Raja. Hope you can hear me all right.
Yes, yes.
It was a very good introduction and the context setting, and thank you for that. And also the great introduction that you gave and set the context on zero trust and its components. It's I'm sure this will be a good sounding board for people to start on. So yeah, from a challenges on the customers, whoever we interact with today, as you rightly said, now it's not the castle which used to be, and borders are really sort of dissolving, or sometimes in our company, we used to call it a borderless security. In fact, there is nothing called as a border right now, or a perimeter. Perimeter has already vanished almost. So the challenge is when you're something like what you keep in your house, and then you put it out in the open. That's where we are as an analogy, in common terms. When customers try to go into the cloud or move into the cloud, there are 3 or 4 aspects that they face challenges with. The first and the foremost, anytime, anywhere access from any device. So that's a very, very important thing, because initially people had some way of connecting to they're in the office, or they connected through the VPN, or some connectivity back to the office. All the systems were on-prem. So in that case, it was much easier and simpler to manage. Now that half of that has gone to the cloud with many accesses, and now extending those access to the partners and the suppliers and all that adds more complexity. And that is the second aspect of it. So when it gets extended to the cloud, the surface or attack surface, we call it, there are multiple points, as you mentioned, Raja. There are so many open points that can be exploited. So that again calls for implementing controls across the entire cloud or the hybrid. So that's a typical challenge that customers face. How do you seamlessly have controls across the hybrid environment, be it on-premise or on the cloud? So that's another aspect that customers grapple with. The third aspect is wherever the workloads are, if something happens, the ability to quickly detect and respond. I mean, with so much of openness, and people can come from anywhere, the holes can be anywhere. And the most important thing is, let there be holes, but somebody exploiting or coming in who's unauthorized should be able to be detected, and as soon as they can, and immediately the hole is plugged or some remedial action is taken. Those are the 3 major things. And one more important point I may want to mention is the identity. identity being like when you connect the partners, your partners, the customers. So as an example, we have a retail industry. There'll be customers shopping from wherever they are, and there'll be suppliers who will be supplying to the organization. So when you extend this, having a single entity across all, that is a very big challenge that customers are facing. How do I have single identity so that I can authenticate the person, like you were just mentioning? Never trust, always verify, the concept of zero trust. How do you really detect this is the person who he says he is? Or how do I say I give them the restricted access to what they're entitled for? I think these are the four major challenges that every customer faces when we really start.
So, SREEKUMAR, thank you. I think there is a question from the audience, and I thought it was very logical extension to what you are saying. If you could briefly touch upon, there is a question around multi-cloud, infrastructure management and application management scenarios. Does it change, when you are dealing with multiple clouds? Because most enterprises will have data centers on-premise as well as multiple clouds.
Correct. Would you want me to respond now, or
I think it is. You are just, it's more a logical extension to what you were just saying. So if you can briefly answer that, it will be perfect.
Sure. So infrastructure management, again, most of there are third-party tools which help you seamlessly manage whether you have multiple clouds or a combination of hybrid clouds. So every organization now subscribes to more than one cloud as a provider. That's where this multi-cloud concept comes in, right? And then you also add your on-premise infrastructure along with it. So there are platforms or tool sets available which can help you to manage this across the multiple areas of, let's say, the on-premise or across multiple clouds. That is at the infrastructure layer. And application management is a slightly a different ballgame because that goes back to your applications management or the development lifecycle. How well you are able to validate your code before it gets into production. So that's what the DevSecOps people talk about. There are things like testing that you do, IAST, SASDAS, those type of concepts. So I think those are things that people probably have to be aware of as part of the development process before something gets onto the production. Hope that helps.
Yes. And just, Venkat, to your question, from a cybersecurity standpoint on multi-cloud, it's important to adopt platforms which can, give you visibility across all your cloud environments and data center and consistent policies. The good news is companies like Microsoft and some of its industry peers have also come to recognize that, there is a large real estate outside of what Microsoft deploys. So they are also working on enabling this. So there is a lot of cross-cloud provider collaboration also happening, which we see today. So over to KHALEEL. KHALEEL, given your background, I think, and because we are talking cloud, if you can briefly discuss, the role of threat modeling in a cloud, environment, right? Cloud application environment. And if you could also explain to the audience briefly what is threat modeling, and then how it is, absolutely necessary in a cloud environment, it will be very helpful.
Sure. Thanks. Am I audible, Roger?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, nice. So good evening once again. So it's actually good. This is the kind of need of the hour. The zero trust principles that we have been summarizing. Just to touch upon, I like three key ones always to have in mind as a security practitioner. So maybe before I touch upon the key question on the threat modeling, especially in the cloud environments we deal with modern apps. So before we touch upon that, I'll just briefly talk about the zero trust principles that we all want to kind of take away from this session. One is obviously, like Sri, my colleague said, identity. So we ought to be today look at identity is not only the user individual or consumer identity, but it's also talking about the non-interactive logins like the APIs, the service calls. These are also actually claimed as identities today. They also need one identity. So verifying the identity explicitly.
KHALEEL, you need to be a little louder. I think, you know,
is it?
Maybe the network is not
Is
so
this
good.
better now? If without the headset?
Yes, it is. It's much better. Yes. So, yeah.
All right. I was just summarizing that, you know, zero trust principles that we may want to take away from my audience here. So one would be that, you know, the verification of the identity to be done explicitly, whether it is, you know, a user accessing or whether it is a system or service call accessing. And the second principle, you know, we always see the large organizations also mandating is the use of least privilege. Once you identify and you verify the identity, then you ensure that the privileges given to that identity is based on the kind of, you know, use case that they are working on. So keep it minimum to the purpose. And the third most important from a zero trust perspective is to actually have an assumption that a breach has already occurred. So your mindset as a security practitioner or, you know, a security professional would actually be very different when you look at deployments, live environments, to see if it is an assumed breach. Then, you know, how would you actually look at, you know, looking at a defensive architecture or defensible architecture? Right? That's just the, you know, key principles you may also want to, you know, have it for yourself. Now, on the threat modeling, before we talk about threat modeling, right? We see there is this, you know, modern apps becoming more popular in the cloud environments. So let's understand what are these ones first, then we touch upon the threat modeling, because that's very essential for us to know what are we trying to, you know, model the threat against and what are we trying to protect. So in a nutshell, if you see today, every organization, whether it is, you know, any sector, enterprise, industrial, government sector, so you see these organizations are kind of very aggressive in trying to innovate, digitalize, and adopt and migrate to cloud for various other benefits, right? These are all inherent benefits. So obviously, you know, it is imperative that the organization should become more agile in building applications, you know, making faster releases to the market, and continuously, you know, making feature enhancements to be accelerating business growth as well as, you know, sustaining the business, right? This is becoming imperative. Now, when you look at these apps being deployed, then essential considerations come from cloud perspective. The advantages like, you know, performance, scalability, availability, and, you know, obviously some of the known pillars. Now, all these expectations from the organizations for, you know, the modern apps obviously are being addressed by a modular application architecture, which is well known for us today. If you see, microservices based, you know, application architecture is becoming very prominent, which actually decouples the application modules and functions of a monolithic application as packages and package these services as a service, as a microservice, and these microservices run on containers, and these containers obviously in deployment environment communicate with each other over an API. Now, these obviously all the hard work of the application engineering team, the cloud engineering team put together, you know, actually have this built, and they get it using DevOps, for example. They deploy this into live environments. Now, these modern apps obviously don't only live upon the microservice architecture, but also they start leveraging more of these cloud native platform services, cloud native serverless functions, and that's where the, you know, complexity comes in. Now, just think from a threat perspective. Now, app teams, you know, development teams, engineering, you know, core engineering teams, they just want the functionality to be working. So they happen to deploy this and get the functionality working. And it so happens that all these services, microservices, can talk to each other, and they kind of, you know, they don't have any communication barriers. They exchange information without any kind of limitations, any kind of limits, restrictions. And if so, there is an adversary kind of intruding in this environment, and there's a high possibility that he can navigate through lateral movement, try to see which all services seem to be more resourceful, and try to make data calls and start exfiltrating the data. So this is where we kind of get to see, you know, eventually a loss of, you know, data, and the business eventually lands up to large scale penalties, sometimes also files bankruptcy. And startups got to be very cautious of this, because, you know, it's growth hacking market, you know, so you really want to try out anything, everything, and the security becomes eventually the last in the row, right, as a priority. Now, what do you want to do as from a zero trust perspective, right? As a security practitioner, like I said, a professional, we want to be, you know, very conversant and very familiar with the the service that the platform is offering as a business service or business platform, what is it offering? The consumer interacts with the, let's say cloud hosted platform, a modern application, could be an e-commerce application, net banking application, and consumer, initiates a transaction and performs some action. There is some resource responses that go back to the user, and that is how eventually you get to see that, a service being fulfilled. So as a security practitioner, it is more important for us today to understand the business context of this application, to understand the data flow path for the service fulfillment, and then understand the underlying microservices that engage in fulfilling the service request. By knowing that, you eventually now get to start limiting the data flow path for the service calls and ensure that you don't want any microservice to communicate with anything else. You just want to restrict and limit that, to the purpose it needs to engage in a transaction or make an API call. This is where you look at key concepts of microsegmentation coming in from zero trust. One is at the network level, where you kind of, keep the microservices and containers in the pods to talk to each other only if there is, necessity for the service fulfillment and data, communication to happen. That's at the network level. You kind of put barriers. If there's no necessity for these two pods from a microservice to another service to communicate, then network level segmentation, network policies take place. And also, if at all there are two microservices need to talk to each other, the backend, let's say there is a service catalog, there's a product catalog in the e-commerce side, there is a e-cart microservice, there's a payment microservice. So if there is a necessity of these to talk to each other, the backend, then you kind of set up a microsegmentation at the identity level to ensure that the exchange of information, once the microservice has been identified, it is not a rogue microservice being introduced, but if it is a legitimate one, then you kind of allow after the verification, like I said, verify the identity explicitly, then you allow the communication to happen only for the data it is permitted to exchange based on the API calls. So
absolutely. So
kind of,
yeah, Khaleel, thanks. In the interest of time, I'll go to Abhishek. Abhishek, I have a big question for you. We have around 22 minutes left. Okay, so we have all this while heard about business continuity, right? We have also heard about these breaches. We have heard about zero trust, but there is a nirvana stage which is called cyber resilience. Okay, so if you could explain in simple terms, right? How do you get to a cyber as a resilient enterprise? And briefly, because you guys are doing a lot in security and zero trust as well, maybe a very high level view into what Microsoft is doing with respect to its strategy, right, will be very useful.
Yeah, thanks, Raja, and good evening to all the attendees. So yeah, I'm not sure how many organizations have reached that nirvana stage, Raja, but I'll share my perspective. And I'll go back to what you started with, right? So initially, in earlier days, you had a data center and you put a firewall and you feel safe behind it, right? And you probably, if you tighten the firewall rules, the organization may feel that breaches cannot happen. But the reality has changed, right? So today, again, as KHALEEL was mentioning in between, we live with a breach mindset, right? We today feel that, hey, in spite of all of the controls, all of the technology we are deploying, something may still go wrong. And that's why organizations need to have this framework or this state where they can be highly cyber resilient, right? I mean, and it's kind of related with the business continuity angle, which you said, but business continuity considers so many other things like physical events and floods, natural disasters, social, political events, things like that. Whereas in cyber resilience, because of our so much of dependence on digitization, it's important that our dependence on this technology is also resilient enough. And this particular cyber resilience is many organizations are going through it, and it's a journey, I would say. And there are many moving pieces to it, as you mentioned, Raja. There are so many different pieces to achieving a good, robust cyber resilient stage. Now, some of the things that has helped us as an organization, and which we are kind of suggesting to our customers also, is, I think cloud is at a center stage in this particular being resilient, aspiration. When we, about a decade back, when we started moving all of our operations and technology to cloud, it really helped us. And it was not an easy journey, but it really helped us in giving us the scale. It helps us in connecting a lot of different technology together. It helps us in kind of recovering from adverse effects. It also gave us a lot of ability to analyze things, right? And in cyber resiliency, building power to analyze things is very important, right? So for example, let's say, you have, a very large digital footprint. You have servers, technologies, network, data, right? And so many things are happening with it. And if you take a look at all of the attackers or the malicious users, they're always trying to do something. So to be able to derive intelligence from all these things which are happening and to be able to respond to it, cloud has really helped us. It has really helped us bring together a lot of technologies and making sense out of whatever is going on. But then there are a lot of other things which have also helped, right? And if you talk about cyber resilience, it's actually managing risks across your entire digital estate, right? Be it, you'll start with perhaps identity, data, network, applications, and so on, right? And across all of these things, there are other things which have helped us. When we started on this kind of journey to being highly resilient, I would definitely mention that, don't forget the hygiene things, right? So the basic hygiene issues, like even simple things like, patching your servers or taking care of your, different antivirus updates. Those things help a lot, because a lot of those, attacks which are successful is basically exploiting these simpler, hygiene issues which are not taken care of. So we took a lot of time in kind of ensuring that those hygiene issues are highly, pervasive across Microsoft and is taking care of that. The other things is obviously knowing your crown jewels, right? So what exactly is most important for you, and being able to, kind of build appropriate security for that. So that was another thing that helped us. So, moving to cloud, ensuring that the security hygiene is taken care of, ensuring security for the crown jewels in your in the organization, and then definitely the topic that we are talking about, zero trust. Zero trust is an integral piece of being highly resilient, and zero trust again has so much of so many nuances to it, so many moving pieces to it, where we are kind of basically pivoting ourselves in three principles, right? So we do not have an implicit trust anymore. We have to verify explicitly. We have to use least privilege access across all of our technology footprint, and we have to work with a assume breach mindset, right? Because in spite of everything that we do, things can still go wrong. So those are some of the things that we have done, which has helped us a lot. And before ending, I would mention one last piece, and which is perhaps very interesting. And folks who want to build a career, this is a very interesting domain for you, and that's around being able to detect attacks, right? So you might sometimes hear these terminologies: threat hunting, right? Threat intelligence, right? So we have invested heavily in, building capabilities and skills to look into those trillions of events which are flowing into our environment, and being able to spot those anomalies and outliers which could indicate something is going wrong. So a fair amount of investment is being done to be able to detect sophisticated attacks. And today, attacks are really sophisticated. They happen, they might start with a simple phishing mail, but go on to, breach your directory services and steal your data. So we should be able to kind of detect it across these stages in which attacks work. So a lot of investments in that also is helping us move towards a better cyber resilient kind of stage. Hope that helps, Raja.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So for the benefit of the audience, I think, one of the things is, how do you go about doing zero trust? Okay, there are multiple approaches, and I think every speaker, panelist has spoken about it. I'll just summarize for everybody's benefit. So there are three real approaches to it. One, I think right from SREEKUMAR, everybody said, identity is very critical, right? So identity of people, identity of devices, and identity of things, right? Saying that, is Raja UKIL indeed Raja UKIL, right? So, or is this API really that API, right? It's not a rogue API. So, there is a lot of work around, identity management and achieving zero trust through identity governance. Okay, so that's one approach. It's difficult to implement, always, but there's a lot of work which large enterprises have done on it. The second approach is micro-segmentation, right? Which I think, KHALEEL referred to, right? Micro-segmentation is, you are building a perimeter of one, right? So if you have a server, you're building a perimeter around it, right? So fundamentally what is happening is you are creating small boundaries around your applications, your server, and going down to the lowest level. And then you are saying who can interact with what, right? So you are establishing then selective trust. And the third, which is very relevant in the pandemic times is, what is called, various terms. Somebody calls it ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. Some people call it SASE, which is slightly different from ZTNA. It's more overarching. But and some people call it software-defined networks. But essentially what it means is, can I access, right, from any device and from anywhere, right? And an application securely, whatever I need to access. It could be a SaaS application, it could be a PaaS, it could be a monolith application, doesn't matter, right? Whether I'm in office from whatever device. So just for the benefit of everybody, that's really the definition of, or the three approaches of zero trust. Zero trust, remember, is a framework and a concept. It's not one magic, a silver bullet that, you fire and you're done, right? So obviously, people need to plan for it. It was very difficult earlier. Right now, it has become simpler with the availability of technology, right? So with that, I'll go over to Joshua, and thanks, Joshua, for being patient. I think, in the interest of time, I'll ask 2-3 questions to you, and I know these are your, you would absolutely love it. And, so one is, I think, you also come from Siemens, which does a lot of work around, on the factory side, the OT side, the IoT side, etc. Yeah. So is zero trust applicable there, right? And what does it mean? So that's one part of the question. And I think there was a question from Rahul, if I'm not mistaken, right, which said that please share examples of large breaches. Rahul, this is available on the public domain. We obviously cannot talk about breaches with our customers if they have not published it, and we do not have their approvals. But you can, in India itself, Cognizant was breached very severely. There are multiple, right, major breaches which have happened, right, with a lot of implications. But Joshua, what I wanted to know from you that are the hackers today, let's call it hackers in the absence of a better word, using a very different types of techniques that none of the traditional things are able to catch it, right? So if you can quickly give an answer to this too, it will be very helpful for the audience.
Yeah, so the hackers are using advanced threats, attacks, but at the same time, they are using IT attacks into ISIS environment, that is the industrial control systems. So historically, right, the OT environments were considered as air-gapped, but it has proven that it is a myth because we have heard a lot of breaches, a lot of ransomware attack. Like we heard a ransomware attack on Dr. Reddy's lab. There was an attack, a cyber incident on Serum Institute, and even on our nuclear power plant, Kundakulam, there was an attack. And a couple of months back, we saw that there was an outage in electricity in Mumbai. So a lot of nation-state attacks, nation-state attack vectors are focusing on India. And it has been proven that OT, which was supposed to be, considered air-gapped, working in isolation, somehow or the other converges into the IT environment, and that is where the hackers, try to see whether first they can hack into the IT environment, and then if there's no secure IT-OT convergence, whether they can laterally move on to the OT environment. And how can zero trust play an important role in OT security is, see, basically in OT environment, it is like, there are different levels, the way how it has been installed. Say there is level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So level 1 to 3 is actual OT industrial environment where the SCADA systems, the controllers, all of these function together for the working of the full factory. Level 3.5 is like the bridge, and level 4 and 5 is the IT or enterprise environment. So it is to level 3, that is where the communication happens. And what I would say is, if we have something called Industry 4.0 architecture, which is a secure industrial architecture in place, a secure IT/OT convergence, and then on top of that, for implementing least privileges, we have the zero trust components or zero trust architecture in place. We can have, like a secure OT ICS environment. So here is where the zero trust component or the zero trust platform is going to verify whether previously it was just, like IP address trying to communicate from IT environment enterprise to the OT environment. But now here with zero trust, we can verify whether human to application is allowed, or user to this particular application or to this particular zone is allowed, or application to application communication is allowed. So after, we never trust here, right? We never trust any of this communication. We verify, see whether these privileges are allowed for this particular user based maybe even on the risk profile. So as of now, zero trust for ICS has not yet matured to that level, but I am hoping that, going forward, it will mature, wherein there'll be dynamic risk profiling, which will take place. And based on the risk score, the privileges will automatically, dynamically be adjusted. So if based on vulnerabilities or some behavior of a particular user or IP, it can either give a risk score, and accordingly the access can be controlled. So that is like for the matured, the zero trust architectures. So this is how, like we can actually use zero trust and have security being addressed for ICS environments. At the same time, I believe that's actually thing is that ICS is legacy platform, legacy protocols, industrial protocols. So it is not the same as IT environment. So kind of they are, little behind when it comes to security. So if we build around it, the good defense in depth architecture, then we will be able to, kind of take care of the security on the whole. Because from level 1 to 3, that is where all the industrial components function, and availability is important. Latency is we cannot tolerate latency there. So there, we can't start verifying things, but around it is what I'm saying, if we verify the privileges and accordingly allow, that is where, zero trust can play an important role.
Yeah, so, thank you, thank you, Joshua. And I think, I think wonderful insights from everybody on zero trust. I can tell you, I learned cybersecurity first time when I was 48 years old. Okay. So people who have questions around, I don't know cybersecurity, I don't come from that background. Don't worry, if I could do it at this age when almost Alzheimer has set in, yeah, I'm sure that you could do it as well, right? It's not difficult. It's a very emerging, and it's a real area, a lot of investments going in, both from federal government, state governments, and also from enterprises themselves. Okay, you talk about the US government, right? They are, the US Defense Department, everybody is investing heavily. Now, in the interest of time, I think the most appropriate person to answer this question will be SREEKUMAR. SREEKUMAR, HCL is a very large enterprise, so you rely on people, so you hire a lot of people from campus and premium campuses like IITK, Kanpur. So if you can throw some lights to maybe the students in this audience, right? What they should do, what kind of, should they pursue cybersecurity as a career? What do they do to prep? If somebody is coming from, like I was a mechanical engineer, right? But, today's world might be different. So, some advice from you to the students will be very helpful in what they can achieve out of this.
Thank you, Raja. Thank you, Raja. As you said, age is not a matter. Like you said, I was also pretty late, considering my experience in medicine. Even I was pretty late because cybersecurity was a field that never existed like 15 years ago or 10 years ago, right? It's sort of evolving field, and it is now there is an interest or a requirement because of things like digitalization, moving to cloud and all that. So from a people standpoint, it doesn't matter which background you're from. There are certain fundamentals people need to have in the basics of computing, then the networks or application development. Based on all these areas, there are so many sub branches of cybersecurity that people can get into. And it is just enormous, and I don't see any lack of demand for at least the next decade. People will find it difficult to get into any level of career within cybersecurity. So people can always build on the skills that they have from their engineering background or any science background. And people not even from science background, there are things like risk and compliance, which will probably need a procedural approach. People in resilience, they can look at the processes. How do they? So it's a process improvement. So I think the career opportunities are endless, and there are multiple domains. I think people have to probably pick something that is of interest to them and start building those skills. And I'm sure they can find.
Yeah. Thank you. I think the other thing is there's a lot of literature available, right? There are a lot of certifications you can do which are available. Just FYI at home, my daughter she's working in a Big Four consulting firm. She chose to take compliance as a subject. I was vehemently opposed to it, but, she said this is the in thing. But with that, we will come to Damnish, Rajiv. Do we have time for rapid fire, or should we go to the Q&A straight? I think we.
Yeah, we can do the Q&A, Raja. I just wanted to mention something about students in this audience who've been asking about what we should do. So as a part of the hackathon, we will be offering the basic cybersecurity certification program which Microsoft offers. They will be available to people who register for the hackathon, and they'll be able to participate in the certification program. Secondly, for professionals, IIT Kanpur does offer certificate programs which can be done online and on a part-time basis. So there'll be more information as we go along during the hackathon. So Raja, back to you.
Yeah, so to the questions, I think, broadly I've read through the question, okay? So one set of questions is around customers, right? Large enterprises, small enterprises, how are they, are they investing enough? Do you see it in India, right? Does it take more time, etc., right? And the second set of questions really relates to, the attacks, right? Is there law enforcement not possible, etc.? Okay. So, why aren't there laws to prevent cybersecurity? Okay, so I'll just attempt, and any of the panelists feel free to add, right? On the second question, right? How they are able to anonymize themselves. There are various techniques. So, for example, somebody's credentials can be stolen, right? Just a simple example: when you go to an ATM, you remember there was this skimming happening of the ATM cards, right? Nowadays they put a cover on top of the hand so that even if they clone the card, they don't get your PIN. So there are many ways, and there are many ways to prevent it as well. So one of them is multi-factor authentication, right? So which you get like an additional authentication on the authenticator app or text, etc., right? Or for example, as Abhishek said, basic hygiene things like patching, right? If you don't patch systems, they're vulnerable. So somebody can come in and exploit, right? And if you have kept one of the gates open to that application, you hear about all the time websites getting hacked, defaced, etc. How does it happen, right? Because something or the other is vulnerable on that application. So there are several techniques. And just as a data point, it almost takes 150 days before a breach is identified and another 65 days to remediate it, okay? So hackers don't come in, they are not like, bank robbers, okay? That they will pull out guns and in 1 hour they will be gone with the cash. They will sit silently, do a small thing so that you will not find them doing anything exceptional or out of the ordinary, and then they breach it, right? So
So Raja, there's this popular saying these days that hackers don't break in, they log in these days. They have your password, they do a proper login.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are multiple techniques which can help solve this. You hear about, increasing user awareness that users are the weakest link. I fundamentally don't agree to that. Okay, if I get an SMS with a link, I will always click on it, right? Means, there will be. We have done a lot of, in various organizations, we have done a lot of this phishing simulations. you will be surprised, close to 30% of the people always get phished successfully, right? So, the world needs better ways of dealing with such things.
So
The second,
actually on the students, right, there were some questions on opportunities, how we can build and all. I think there was some questions on that.
So I'll come to that. I'll come to that, Joshua. So another thing is there a significant cost involved? Does it replace any of the current technology sets? Okay, those questions. And how does the effort varies from large organizations to small organizations? The answer is yes, right? So zero trust does not necessarily replace existing investments right on day one. You can slowly remove them, and yes, the effort is significantly higher in large enterprises as opposed to small enterprises. The reason being, their real estate is much bigger in terms of their application servers, etc. And second thing is, large organizations also have a lot of governance and control and policies, right? So unfortunately, what has happened is, we all come from companies who are exactly focused on how to make life simpler for our customers and help them get to that end state which they desire very quickly. Joshua, go ahead on the advice on the careers, okay?
Yeah, so I mean, since we have students and kind of startups also in this call, I thought maybe some research ideas will also be good for the students who are working on AI, ML and analytical models, mathematical models. So we have one problem, that is data privacy. Like, for example, if there are multiple hospitals and, they have their own customer data and they want to do analytics on top of it, but they want to collaborate, different hospitals from in different regions want to collaborate and, want to do analytics on top of it, but they cannot share the customer data because it is PII data. So this is where something called homomorphic encryption and other encryption methods come into play, wherein you encrypt the full data with homomorphic encryption, send it across, and then when data is in use in the cloud, you send it across to the cloud service where the data scientist will be processing it, but they will not have access to plain text data. They will have access to encrypted data. They will run the functions on the encrypted data, get the output, and then decrypt it. But the output will be only to get how many people in which region or which age are susceptible to cancer or many other things. So that is one area of research, which students can explore, because homomorphic encryption is something which is still been researched on. There are some things which are it is slow. There are less computations which can be done. There are less algorithms, but it is still a research topic. And people who are interested in mathematical, AI, ML, this model building and all, they can actually try to explore around this area and try to address the data privacy, where data can be shared, but it can be shared securely without breaching PII data, without exposing any PII data of customers.
Thank you, Joshua. So I think we have come to the end of the session. To my co-panelists, I would have loved myself to hear more from you. Okay, and to the audience, as you can see, this is a topic which we are debating, discussing with customers on a daily basis. All of us are very passionate about it, right? So we could talk nonstop for 3 days, if you will, right, on this. And and I'm really impressed with the kind of questions which you have posted. We could answer some, but in the absence, lack of time, we could not answer everything. So what we'll request Damnesh and Rajiv is, if you could send us across those questions, we will make sure that, we answer and get back to you, right? There's nothing right or wrong. Some of these questions are very insightful, okay? But we will definitely try and see if we can help you. And all of us personally look forward to visiting IIT Kanpur, whenever you're there. You're comfortable for you to be there, and love to interact with you. And I'm, seriously impressed with the number of people, and I'm sure, you will do wonders in the hackathon as well. So over to you, Rajiv, back if you had any closing comments.
Thank you very much, Raja. So we are nearing the conclusion of this webinar, the first one. For all the participants who have been asking questions about careers and what are the opportunities, Just keep in mind, keep following the hackathon. There will be more and more information for people who are interested in cybersecurity. And I talked about Microsoft certification program. There is a special offer for all the hackathon participants there. There is a startup discussion happening just after the Shera. So carriers, startups, building up experience on cybersecurity, that's all going to be covered in the hackathon. The last thing I want to mention, this hackathon is not just for people who know cybersecurity. It is for those people who want to know about cybersecurity, because the field is very niche field and it requires a lot of expertise, but we do need a lot of people who know about cybersecurity. So even if you know nothing about cybersecurity, like Raja said, if you don't know anything about it, she also mentioned about it, that you can get into it. And this hackathon is a vehicle where you can enter the cybersecurity domain. And some of you work with the clients, and you know the cybersecurity consultants get very good billing rates. So those are prized people. They get good job opportunities as well. So thank you all very much for this very nice session on Zero Trust Security Model. And if we get too many questions, Raja, maybe we'll repeat the seminar about a month later when the hackathon also is in.
Absolutely. So I'm saying that, we all personally love this forum. So, we got together, we decided how to go about it, speak. So we are very passionate about it. So whatever, we don't mind answering questions, and I'm committing on behalf of my fellow panelists. But, we would love to absolutely come back and do a repeat session if everybody is okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, the audience.
Thank you, everybody.
Being here.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.